All right. Brian and Abram, are you on?
Brian's here.
Hi, Brian. This is Abram.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Just got some difficult news, and so I'm kind of processing that a little bit.
I hear you. Well, best wishes to you. I'm sorry to hear that.
Abram?
I think I'm going to go back in the music, Sam, to our default song, for lack of,
right.
of anything more creative.
Okay.
Oh, and my Wi-Fi is not loading. All right, I'm going to just skip the music here. My Wi-Fi is not loading as I was chatting with Sam before we got on the air. The Spectrum Wi-Fi just opened up. Public internet and everyone's internet is now kind of a little bit slower, but that's okay.
Yep.
We used to not have internet, so we'll all survive.
You got to hit the beatbox.
Yeah, I could sing a song. Hey, maybe I'll bring a guitar out here. Yeah, I'll just sing a song.
I think Brian's the only musician on this call. So, Brian, can you do something for us? All right now.
Yeah, magic. That's
Thank you, Brian. So
You got
with
it.
that, I'm going to say welcome, everyone, to The Radical Bureaucrat, a podcast for people who want to change institutions from the inside.
Today is Tuesday. Thank you for that, Brian. Today is Tuesday, March 24th, and things are suddenly feeling extremely serious here in New York City. And we want to acknowledge one story in particular that hits close to home for many in our communities. I want to acknowledge the passing of Dizanne Romaine. And if I'm mispronouncing that, that's only out of not knowing Dizanne personally. But Principal Romaine was a principal of Brooklyn Democracy Academy in Brownsville, New York. Many people know the long, storied history of the Ocean Hill-Brownsville area. And there's additional news out of Brownsville of other community leaders who are confirmed cases or are in the hospital. And so, all across the organization, people are sort of like really feeling the organization that Sam and I work for, at least in the city of New York, that people are really feeling this moment. I think there's a lot of fear. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of mourning that just today, is starting to hit us. And I think we're probably going to be this way for a while. And so before we jump into a podcast that talks about kind of some of the more technical aspects and where we go from here, we wanted to take a moment to pause and acknowledge that story in particular and the many like it that are unfolding all around us.
Right. Okay. Thanks for opening that up, Abram, and starting with that sentiment. And then, on top of that, to give some more context to the exact moment we're in, this morning, Governor Cuomo said that the rate of increase of infection in New York State is doubling every 3 days. The curve is going up, and he's saying that we're going to peak higher and sooner than predicted. So it's definitely a scary time, and we know a lot of people are being impacted very directly, and we're, like Abram said, we're starting to hear about it right away. But that then brings us to what we're talking about today. We were really interested to talk to someone in another part of the country that faced this before us, just to get another perspective. Yesterday, we spoke to someone in South Korea who also, faced the coronavirus before us, and definitely recommend you listen to our episode with Jake and Cho. Today, we're talking with an old friend of mine, Brian Salter. As you heard, he knows how to beatbox pretty well. Brian and I also spent quite a few Sundays playing touch football in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Shout out to the PPFL. He's a marketing executive in the beverage industry. He's lived in Seattle now with his family, so we're talking to Seattle, Washington. He's lived there for the last 2.5 years, and he's generally a curious, well-rounded, athletic dude. So welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Oh, thank you much. I appreciate the generous introduction.
Yeah. So, Brian, can you give us some context just to how things, like, tell us where you are, how you are, and how things have been in Seattle?
Yeah, I'll do my best. It's a heavy question, even just starting with something like that. So yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I'm here in Seattle, and pretty much in the city of Seattle in a neighborhood called Ballard, which is traditionally like a fishing industry neighborhood, which is just kind of like an interesting anecdote about it. I think in relationship to coronavirus, at least, like, it's just weird. I was going through some old text messages, and I was thinking to myself, like, when did I hear about this, and how long has it been on my head? And I think it was late January when I first started getting text messages around it and around the seriousness of it. And at the time, I don't think I was taking it particularly seriously. It felt like something that was far, couldn't get my arms around it, didn't really seem to impact me. But very quickly, so like, I want to say I probably first heard about it January 22nd, right? Like mid to late January. But very quickly it started to impact me, both locally, just like in the area, and how people are talking about it and how it's impacting people here. But then also professionally as well, just like with all the conferences that got canceled. I work in the natural food industry, and there's a huge conference that takes place in Southern California, in Anaheim, just next to the campus of Disneyland. And that was to take place in February. And very quickly, people started to understand, like, hey, maybe having an international conference on food where people are coming from international origins and getting together to sample, like, bits of food over, like, tables and surfaces and shaking hands and trading and sharing food might not be the best format for a conference, like hundreds of thousands of people, right? And it was something that we sunk a lot of cost into. I mean, this is really, from a marketing perspective and, from a business perspective, this is our Super Bowl of all of them. This is when all of our customers are going to be under one roof, right? We're talking about, like, the Costco's and the Whole Foods and, like, all the folks under one roof, talking about natural foods, innovation within natural foods, lots of opportunities to make actual business deals in this environment, tons of sunken costs. And at the end of the day, we had to pull the plug. I was actually proud that we were able to make that decision as an organization. But then after we had made that decision, they decided to cancel the conference as a whole. Right. So, like, that to me was probably the kickoff of when I knew that this was going to be a lot more serious than what I had anticipated initially.
Yeah. So what's it like in Seattle in terms of, do people feel like, because I think Seattle is probably like 3 weeks ahead of New York. And so does it feel like you've reached the peak yet? What are people saying, and how does it feel?
This has changed at breakneck speed. Things have changed so quickly. So, like, I think you're not wrong in what you said, right? Seattle's been going through it. The state of Washington has been going through it for at least 3 weeks to maybe a month, right? And in many ways, I think, like, from a policy perspective and from a response perspective, I think the government of Washington has probably set the pace for a lot of our nation's response. That said, honestly, where you guys are, and I have roots in New York for sure, like, I'm more worried about you guys right now than I am
Mm-hmm.
in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
The somber note that this program opened with,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Yeah.
For lack of a better term, like New York just ain't built for that life. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like you guys know it, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
The proximity factor is just not advantageous for us to beat this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now where I am, I feel like you're right. Seattle has set the pace in many ways,
Mm-hmm.
but it feels like New York has caught up and surpassed Seattle within the last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do get the sense when I talk to people around the country, they're always like, wow, New York, like it's definitely getting a lot of press around the country, and that may be a reflection of the reality. I mean, it's hard to say.
I think it's about to get a lot more press.
Yeah. And so just one more question about Seattle, because I do want to bring it back to just what this is like for you personally, but this does kind of get to your personal story. So now you've been basically on lockdown for a few more weeks than us, and you and I joked when we talked before the call about, you said, like, in some ways just your lifestyle, the way that you work from home and things like that, you already were working from home so much, and so many of your relationships and friendships were still on the East Coast, and so it wasn't like you were doing a lot of socializing there. But I know that you're still more locked down than you were before this started. And I'm just wondering, in your experience and your observation, what's it like now to be locked down 3 weeks to 4 weeks as opposed to where we are in just like a week and a half? Like, how does the experience change? What should we be anticipating?
So it's super layered. So I think there's a lot of perception and reality. And then there's also the language that we use to describe our state, right? So like you just used the word lockdown, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other states use the word shelter in place.
Mm-hmm.
Now states are starting to use stay at home. And
Mm-hmm.
each one of these things, like as a marketing guy, each one of these things connotes a different experience related to it.
Mm-hmm.
Lockdown is not how I would characterize what we are currently doing here in Seattle.
Mm.
And what I would probably call it, and you're right, it's been going on longer here than, say, like in New York. But how I would call it would be like a recommendation, a list of recommendations as to how we should go about managing our personal lives during this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
It does not feel overly mandated by the government.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking for myself, right? Like someone else might have a different opinion on it.
Sure.
There have been some changes, right? So like restaurants, bars, taverns, they've closed their doors and they've opened up for takeout. And there have been serious impacts to various consumer-based and customer-based industries, especially restaurants, bars, taverns, retail. A lot of part-time workers who work in these industries have been hit really hard and are frankly out of work or just like greatly reduced income. And honestly, I would say those are probably the biggest impacts that I've seen in the area. From my experience, I've noticed that people are obviously on edge, right? So like when you go to your local coffee shop, Seattle has a lot of those, right? You go to your coffee shop, you bring it up and you talk to people, everybody's very hyper aware of it. But I'll also share with you, like this past weekend, for example, the weather was great, you know, and I saw a lot of people posting online, like in their local park, right? Because this is part of the guidelines that go out to folks, like go outside, enjoy the outdoors, right? And there's a counterintuitive response that I've noticed where everybody is going outdoors at the same time. And And the park system that we have here is not built for everyone to go at the same time.
Right.
And so I feel like folks have these guidelines and lists of recommendations, and they feel like they're being responsible, they're doing the right thing, they're trying to stay 6 feet apart from people. But when they're out there, like, it's hard, right? Because you've just got like hundreds of people just outdoors enjoying themselves, you know?
Right.
Should they feel bad about being outside and enjoying themselves? I don't think so, right? Because there's also like this shaming culture that's come along with this whole thing too. Right? Like, you know, like, oh, you're selfish. What are you doing outside? Like, get back inside, right? I have to say, like, right now, it just feels like a list of guidelines that people are trying their best to adhere to, but without the accountability and without it being streamlined into, I don't know, like a formal response that's regulated by the city or by the government or some sort of organizing body in some kind of way. It feels like the impact, the overall result that we're trying to create is not necessarily happening.
And I mean, I'm just seeing, I saw a graph on Twitter today that I hope it's from a reputable source to have it. You know, this thing just popped up, but it showed the actual curve of the U.S. in terms of cases compared to other countries. And ours is just bananas, like by far the worst. And so, I mean, we're seeing, I mean, I'm going to make it a little bit political, but like we're seeing the inefficacy either of our cultural response or our government response. And at the same time, we're seeing leaders at all levels kind of jostling for the mic and seeing the benefit. Like the more mic time you get, the more press conferences you get, seems to be the better the response. So this is what you're talking about makes me feel really pessimistic, honestly.
I hope not to be I you know, and that's
I already felt bad.
Don't feel bad. It is what it is. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Like, I mean, honestly, like you said, like you and I spoke last week, right? So much has changed even from that time, you know. And right now, I really find myself straddling that line between being alarmist and realistic. Things are changing very quickly, you know. Like I told that story about how we canceled our participation in that natural food conference in Anaheim, California. If as I like get in my DeLorean and go back in time to that moment, of course we're not doing that.
Right. Yeah. That was the right call. Yeah.
Of course we're not doing that. But like at the time, that was a huge decision to make for us and our company and all of the costs associated with it. And so when I think about if I get back in my DeLorean and go 3 weeks into the future, like what are the decisions that we're making now that are just going to be like, of course, you know? Right. Because that's how quickly our reality is changing. I don't mean to be pessimistic, but at the same time, and some of it is just like you guys are now doing like a real time, like more lifestyle podcast. Like, I think some of that's the impact of that format that you guys have chosen because it's just changing day to day, week to week. There's so much changing right now.
So we like to ask our guests just to ground it in bring it back down just to your personal experience. What's an important challenge that you as an individual are facing today, be it at home or at, work or combination? What's the challenge that's most present on your mind?
So I think the obvious stuff is just like the constant personal accountability of like, am I staying at home enough? Am I reducing contact enough? Am I making the right decisions to make sure people are safe, not just myself, but my neighbors and et cetera, right? So I feel like that's like the personal calculus that I'm going through day by day. From a work perspective, so you didn't mention at the top, I'm in marketing, but specifically my lane is doing events and
Right.
even more specifically creating experiences for consumers at these events, right? Well, that's not happening right now. Like, we're not doing events, right? It's not the priority, number one. And number two, I mean, you can't do an event with under 10 people, right? So one of the biggest things, and, for me has been, okay, how can I be nimble, and what are the pivot points that I can create where I can still do effective marketing, but to make it authentic and to find areas where I can help people within that.
Yeah.
So like really identifying the corporate responsibility angle, and it has to be done right, because like I talked about walking that fine line. The line that I find myself walking right now is providing the basic guiding principle to myself and my team that, number one, we're not looking for likes. We're not looking for promotion. We're looking to help people. Right? That's got to be our underlying guideline. That said, we still have to operate in a way that is authentic to our positioning of our brand. And so it still has to make sense in some kind of way, right? So it doesn't make sense for, I don't know, it makes sense for a fireman to help people who are in burning buildings, right? It makes less sense for a fireman to be helping people who are, I don't know, need help to get to the grocery store.
Right.
Right. And so I think about that from the perspective of my brand as well. What makes sense for us to do out there, and what is the positioning of our brand so that we can actually use our resources to help people. And that's been the challenge, because you guys, you talk about bureaucracies, right? How do I work within the resources of my company to pivot quickly to the circumstances that are facing us now and reallocate those resources in ways that are going to make sense? And how do I hit the levers across the entire organization so that we can align and create difference in a way that's actually beneficial for people? And that's the hardest thing for me professionally right now, and quite frankly, it's what I'm losing sleep over.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a challenge for the rest of your life. I'm just going to let you know that. That's basically what our whole podcast is about. So, but I'm glad that you said that, because I think that you stated the challenge very clearly. And it's interesting because we talk to people who, and Abram and I talk about this ourselves, as people who work in government agencies or nonprofit organizations who, in a sense, are facing the same conundrum. Ostensibly, the mission is supposed to help society, but even in an organization where the mission is there to help, it doesn't always work that way. And so then you're inside this institution and you're like, how do I stay in my lane? We call it, how do you rock the boat and not fall out? How do I stay in my lane and do what I'm there to do, but do it in a way that shifts things in, a more in a direction that is more pointing towards social justice. And I think the crisis right now makes that responsibility feel more present for everybody. But it's kind of the question we should be asking in all industries all the time.
100%. Yeah. And it's hard, right? I think, some of those questions and answers are perhaps more prevalent and responsive in areas like education. And I'm sure there's a ton of bureaucracy around actually implementing change and impacts and results and all that stuff, right? But in a corporate environment, very often, I think finally people get it in corporate America that consumers respond to messages related to social justice. Right?
Yeah.
And I think corporations understand that that's what consumers respond to, but we also have to understand that the motivation seems to be around what consumers respond to and satisfying that need over actually doing good in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that what motivates us, what pushes us to have that boat rock but not turn over is important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's always at least two missions. One, the mission, the masthead mission, the leadership, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And then the mission of the greater social or public or common good, right? And that's where we develop people, right? Where we think about how people stretch themselves and achieve goals they didn't think they could achieve before. That's not always the most efficient for the bottom line method, to take the time to like really develop people or teach people or take care of people, give people the space they need to take care of themselves in a time like this.
Yeah.
Right? Like that deeper humanizing element, right? Is the thing that sometimes is lost in the transactional world that is the marketplace. We still have to get transactions done, but let's not lose that human part.
Yes. I'm so glad you mentioned transactions, right? Because so often what we get lost in are these transactional moments, right? And it can't be, when you enter into a conversation really about anything, right? It can't just be about, okay, I'm here for a stated purpose. What can you do for me to help realize that goal, right? Like, it's got to be, and this is a term that everybody uses, I think, kind of ubiquitously nowadays, but it's got to be about sustenance. How can we sustain life? Mm-hmm. And through the meeting of these two individuals in one place at this time, like, how can we merge our goals together to create sustenance, life, and growth?
Yeah,
and very often, especially within like the marketing decision tree, we get caught into these transactional, situational conversations.
Yep.
And we get lost in a deficit model because we operate out of our fears. And we don't think through, what are the opportunities of growth here? Like, can we come together and not necessarily know what the benefit is going to be? But
can we just make space together, can we just make space for curiosity and experimentation together? Right?
Yeah. How can we collaborate? And I mean, this is one of the things that we talk about, collaborative business planning, right? Like, let's both come to the table. You tell me what your goals are. I'll tell you what my goals are. And then let's come to an understanding where we can identify opportunities of growth. But when you come to that table and you already have like all of your objectives locked in, you're operating out of the deficit model. And so, like, what you're talking about, Abram, is how do you develop people, but also how do you scale ideologies? How do we identify what people will actually respond to, right? Because it's very difficult to develop an individual when you scale that out to the hundreds of millions of individuals that we're trying to impact change on. But if there's an ideology where folks have empowerment to develop themselves within that model, then there could be hope for growth. And right now, I do find that we're very splintered, we're very fractured.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to achieve those things without an effective ideology that people can get behind.
Yeah.
And I know it's like super like out there and in the clouds, and it's hard to lock that down without like examples and case studies, but I don't know.
Well, that's the work. We've got time to write some case studies. So we've got to shut things down. I could sit here for a few more hours and kind of talk about all this, but I don't know that anybody would listen that long. So as we close out, I just want to ask what we try to ask everyone that comes on The Radical Bureaucrat, which is, what's one thing that's bringing you a sense of calm in the midst of this storm?
I so very much want to end on an optimistic note. It's funny, like what I normally do to bring myself calm is actually try to be as productive with my downtime as possible by listening to podcasts. I know that sounds like that's usually what brings me calm, right? So like, my day is so busy, I got to load the dishwasher, or maybe like my wife would probably say, like, why aren't you loading the dishwasher? But
Surely
I try to engage my mind with productive thought during menial tasks.
Right.
That said, right now it's hard because a lot of those podcasts are crafting doomsday scenarios that get my mind spinning.
Oof.
And so recently I've caught myself just staring at my daughters when in a moment of levity and just smiling. And that's all I got.
That'll do it.
That'll do it. How old are your daughters now, Brian?
They're 4 twins.
Yeah.
Wow. So beautiful.
And one of them's named Naima Sam.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
After the Coltrane song, not after my wife, I assume.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
But still, that's what my wife was named for as well.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us. It's good to be back in touch, and let's continue to stay in contact.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys for asking me to participate. No one's really ever asked me for my thoughts before, so I'm honored to be here. So thanks, guys, and stay safe.
You too.
Well, they should.
Take
care, Brian.
Take care.
All right. Bye.
So let's end like good radicals, Sam. What's one thing you walk away from all of that with that you can use to create a more just and equitable world?
One is that we need to really talk about capitalism, because what Brian is talking about seems so, capitalism is not set up for corporations to do what he's talking about.
Right. Yeah.
At least not the way I understand. And so I thought it was really interesting to hear from someone in the corporate world, and I applaud him for what he's doing. But, to a certain extent, all of us in a capitalist society are restricted, some more than others, in terms of trying to pursue a social justice vision and mission. So that's one. But the other thing is, I thought he made a good point about language. I had actually heard Governor Cuomo make the same point, because he didn't want to call it a shelter in, but de Blasio wanted to call it a shelter in, and Cuomo said language matters. But I think we've naturally gravitated towards the word lockdown here in New York City, and that's not an official word. And you and I started using it. I'm sure we're hearing it in other places. Mm-hmm. And it's just a reminder that language matters, and maybe that's not the best term for what we're experiencing, even if it feels like it, because when we say it, we're speaking it into reality. And maybe that's not the way that we should be talking about it, because the truth is we can go out and take walks, and the grocery stores still are open. And so it's not true that everyone in New York City is locked in their apartment and can't go anywhere. As much as sometimes it feels like we're getting mixed messages around that, but that's not the actual reality.
Yeah.
So what about you?
I struggle with it a little, but I appreciate what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I think, there's something to. I think lockdown, and the first thing I think of is school shooting. Whoa, something's happening. Everybody stop what you're doing. Pay attention to this. Don't move. Right. And I guess that maybe that language was useful for a time, but maybe now it's more encumbering than it needs to be, because it's not locked. Although, you know, you should lock yourself down. Self-lockdown, maybe it's self-lockdown. I don't know. Yeah, I think the conversation around this idea of transacting and human connection, transacting and a sort of culture of thriving, or of human thriving, you know. And I think you're right. Capitalism is not necessarily set up to that, except that in the foundation of capitalism is fear and greed. That and this is right. This is at the Adam Smith a la what's the movie where they do this? There's like a
I don't know.
I'll find the movie clip, everyone, or you can find it and tweet it to me.
We will not be editing that out.
Yeah, we're not doing any editing, and we need to bring it in for a landing, right?
Right.
These are going to turn into 3-hour podcasts, Sam. It's happening. So at the root of capitalism is this fear and greed. This I will charge you as much as I can. That's the greed. And the I'm afraid that you will go to someone else. I'll lose you as a customer. That's the fear that keeps you from overcharging. In that fear of losing the customer, in that fear of competition, is the kind of, I guess to use sort of the Marxist language, the seeds of the destruction of that model, right? That like, this is what humans want. And if you want humans to buy your widget or your whatever your product, then you've got to attend to the humans. They're going to find out what you do with your workers in a crisis. That's going to happen.
Right.
So you should think about helping people before you think about, the bottom line. That's so 80s.
Right. Yeah. All right. Should we wrap up there, Abram?
We really should.
Okay. So everyone, if you're still listening, thank you so much. And we
you.
know that you're here
You
for us.
made it.
So we want to ask that you help us out. You can help us out by commenting on our Twitter handle when we post this episode, or tweet this episode at RadBureau, RADBUREAU. We also have a website that we haven't talked about, radicalbureaucrat.com. On Sunday, I put up a blog post called Love, Collectivism, and Rasquachismo.
Rasquachismo.
Yes.
It's a little bit of a mouthful. We'll get there.
Rasquache. You'll have to read the post to see what that's about, but it's really the big themes that have been swimming around in my mind for the last week or so. And maybe we'll talk about it on another episode. But yeah,
we've got to
check out the website, comment on the blog, tweet us on Twitter. And sorry, Abram, you were going to say something?
Yeah, we've got to do a Just Me and Sam episode. We've had so many guests.
I know, and we've got an amazing one tomorrow.
Oh man, I can't wait for tomorrow.
Yeah, we got David Kirkland from NYU Metro Center, so definitely check that one out. He is always fantastic. So we're going to end by being good bureaucrats. The views expressed here are our personal opinions and do not reflect the official or unofficial position of any government agency, policy, party, leader, or really anyone besides the two of us, and maybe you, but maybe not. This content has not been sponsored or approved by anyone and was mostly just made because we wanted an opportunity to talk about things that matter to everyone, whether they realize it or not. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening, everyone.